Hey everyone, Sparks back with another Etheria Restart video, and this is our first official patch notes for Etheria Restart. We are only a few days away from the official launch, and these are some pretty major power adjustments they have made since the end of the beta. So there's a lot more to these patch notes. It goes over some things that we just talked about in the last news video that I put out, as well as just some more clarifications on various things we've already known about. But the big thing that I want to talk about in this video is all of the combat balance adjustments, or the buffs and debuffs to all of the characters and some moves that have changed and skills and things. So let's check it out. First one here, Grim Penalty Chloros. Okay, so Chloros' adjustment goes from, on his skill 3, deals 400% to now dealing 480% damage to a single enemy and applies Doom Toll. Each time Doom Resurgence is cast, the skill's damage output permanently increased by an additional 25% up to a maximum of 100%. The skill's targets the target cannot be revived for the remainder of the battle. Okay, so basically he just deals 80% more damage. So instead of 400, it goes to 480. Do I think this is going to affect much? Probably not. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one. Veronica. So it's kind of interesting here. You'll notice that the red text means it's a buff, whereas if I scroll down here really quick, the green text is a debuff. I don't know, it's kind of opposite of what you would think. It's like not intuitive if you just glance at it. But anyway, let's see what Veronica does. So adjusted Spirit Circle, or her skill 3, deals 420% damage to a single enemy with an 80% chance to steal all of the target's buffs, then has a 100% chance to spread all those buffs to all allies, and additionally applied Soul Ward for 1 turn. Okay, so this is a big deal, I think. Veronica was, from what I understand anyway, I didn't get to play the initial test server, but she was like a top tier unit on the first test. And then in the beta, she was kind of mid. She wasn't terrible, but she was kind of mid. And so she got a big debuff. Basically, they're returning her to what she was originally. So the big deal here is that went from 50% to 100% chance to spread her buffs to all allies. So, I mean, stealing the target's buffs and then being guaranteed to give that to all of your team is pretty powerful. So I definitely expect her to go back up the tier list. We'll see what happens, relative to all the other adjustments, but definitely a big buff to Veronica, and I'm kind of really excited to play with her now. And by the way, I will be doing a full tier list for launch, so make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that, and I'll kind of give in the next video some recommendations on what units you should build and pull for on the beginning, now that we have their final kits, because any other information that you heard before is just not accurate because we knew it was going to change. Okay, moving on though, let's see what Mia does. So Spirit Water Mia, skill cooldown reduced by 1 turn from 5 to 4. 5 is kind of an eternity, so 4 is cool. Skill 3 says heals all allies for 25, now goes to 30% of her max HP, reduces all allies, Annas, and Shell skill cooldown by 1, extends all buffs by 1 turn, and shortens all buffs by 1 turn, excluding control effects. This is probably somewhat significant. Like I said, a whole cooldown less is good, and then the heals going from 25 to 30 is, of course, a nice buff there. Okay, Alluring Enchantress Zeta, and honestly, I don't know how to pronounce name. I think this is actually a Chinese name. If you know how to pronounce this in Mandarin, please let me know. Give me a comment if you know. But anyway, I'm going with Zeta for right now. So she was honestly a pretty disappointing character. I used her quite a bit in the beta. She was one of the first SSRs that I pulled, and she wasn't terrible, but she wasn't that impressive either. So anyway, she goes from deals 220% damage to all enemies with a 60% chance to apply defense down for 2 turns. That was good. And then for each evolution of her soul flames, the skill's current and maximum CD is reduced by 1. Cool. And deals an additional instance of 90% damage. So it went from 80% to 90% damage. Do I think this is going to suddenly make her a top tier unit? Probably not. I think just giving her a little bit of a buff, though, is good, because her damage... Ooh, I just shook the whole camera there. Her damage was really kind of disappointing. She has some decent effects. Has an AoE attack here. Going from 80 to 90% damage, I don't think is going to make a huge difference, but making her better, it's better to not go overboard and then suddenly she's OP, right? So that's cool. I'm a fan of her character, so it's cool to see that she'll be just a little bit stronger. Hit that a little bit harder. Okay, Abyss Nightmare Tiamat. Everyone's favorite dragon mama. Let's see what she actually does here. She went from being like the #1 pick that everyone was recommending to then being like, maybe she's not as good. And then even in my own tournament meta analysis, link to that in the description below if you want to check it out. It was demonstrated like that she really has a lot more weaknesses than maybe a lot of people thought initially. But a lot of times people were still saying that she was going to be recommended, especially for free-to-play players. But she is getting some pretty significant debuffs here. So notice the green numbers now. So upon reaching 8 stacks of Bloodbath, enters ultimate form. That's normal. So anytime she heals or takes damage, she gets that stack. Recovers, instead of 30% of her maximum HP, only 10% of max HP. That's a very small heal. So, I mean, compared to 30%, which was very significant, 10% is a pretty small heal. Now, would that alone suddenly make her terrible? No, still a strong unit. But that's a pretty significant debuff. Then it says, each stack of Bloodbath increases healing received instead of only 4%, goes up by 3%. So up to a maximum of 20 stacks and cannot be dispelled. The 4% to 3%, again, these are like, this is kind of a really incremental change. I don't think either of these things make Tiamat terrible, but I think her stocks were going down in a lot of people's opinion already, and I think she's kind of difficult to set up. And we saw from the initial test server where everybody got fully leveled accounts to play with that she kind of fell off in the end game. So it was already like, is she going to be worth it in the long run? And now she's just getting weaker. Now, again, I don't think this means Tiamat is terrible. If you're still a fan of her, pull her, play with her. She still has some really strong abilities and can do good work for you, to be honest. I wouldn't write her off, but I don't think she should be like anyone's #1 pick at this point. These are fairly significant debuffs, and I kind of personally questioned it even from the beginning, but I still think she is definitely a high tier unit. She is still strong overall. Don't get me wrong. Okay. Woolly Revenant Rahu. I almost said Wahoo. Rahu. Getting several significant buffs. So, skill 1 deals damage to a single enemy equal to 320, now 350 of his defense, with a 60% chance to apply defense down for 1 turn. That's cool. I mean, honestly, deals damage to a single enemy equal to 350% of his defense. I wasn't super impressed by this guy, but I did see a lot of people using him. And I think one of the issues was that he just didn't hit quite hard enough because he didn't really do a whole lot of other like really crazy effects. So he needed to do more damage. And so I think this is definitely a positive buff for him to make him better. And then for skill 3, passive effect, Wraithful Form. Each stack increases his defense instead of only 4% to 5%. So again, he's going to hit harder and have more defense, up to a maximum of 12 stacks and cannot be dispelled. And then passive effect, Wrathful Form. At 8 stacks for every 4% damage or 4% defense higher than the target, his basic attack damage output increases by 1% to a maximum of 30. Now can go up to a maximum of 40. So again, just like increasing his damage potential. I think that's probably a good buff for him. Okay, Linglo. So this is our great and powerful healer that everybody gets after the 7-day event. If you complete all of the requirements, she was already really, really good, and she's actually getting buffed even more. So I think this could push people into being even more tanky builds. Because, I mean, she was already good. It was questionable whether, like, just going all in on speed and cleave would be worth it. I think, healing's even better now, so maybe that's the way to go. Anyway, let's see what she does specifically here. So Whirlpool, skill 1, Rockstar, before each heal has a 65 and now a 75% chance to purify 1 debuff from the target. So even more ability to dispel debuffs, that's great. 75% chance is a good increase. And if the target has no debuffs, has a now 75% chance to apply Whale Prayer for 2 turns when previously it was 65. So I don't think this really changes her abilities all that much. I mean, it's not like she suddenly does something she didn't do before, but she's just an even more reliable healer and support. So, I mean, again, she was great before, even better now. Doom Blossom Rosa. All right, so this is someone who I'm considering using my guaranteed pull on, although I don't know if you should use your guaranteed pull at all. Again, I'll talk about that in later videos. But for now, her skill 1, she is getting a debuff. Deals 3 instances of 75% damage to a single enemy. If the final strike is a crit, has a 50% chance to push back the target's turn meter by 8%. Previously it was 10%. This is a debuff, but this is a very small debuff. Honestly, relying on this particular aspect of her kit was kind of like not something you really want to do. I mean, you really needed to build for crit, because if she doesn't crit, it doesn't happen, right? And, you know, again, going from 10% to 8%, is that going to shuffle the turn order that much? Probably not. You know, the main thing is that she can deal a truckload of damage anyway. I think, you know, Rosa was already good. Yes, technically she's slightly worse, but I think Rosa is still a top tier character and someone that you should be looking at for sure. Okay, Nocturne Prayer Born. I'm going to go with Born. Skill 2 passive gets a buff. At the start of battle, increase the HP cap by an amount equal to 500%, now 560% of his attack, and each attack adds damage equal to 30% of his maximum HP. Yeah, that's good. Also in skill 3, when more than 4 enemy units are alive, deals instead of 440%, now 480% of AoE damage to all enemies with a 100% chance to dispel 1 buff from each target. For each enemy unit defeated, deals an additional instance of 100% damage. So it went from base 440% damage to 480%. Born could already hit harder than almost every other unit in the game. He was like a top 3 damage dealer. Very, very strong unit, and just does even more damage. Yeah, he's strong. Okay, let's see what the next one is. Puppet Master Lilith. Okay. Deals damage to all enemies equal to 20%, now 24% of her maximum HP, with a 100% chance to apply speed down to all targets for 2 turns. Detonates on the primary target and pushes back its turn meter by 100%. So basically, we just went from deals damage to enemies equal from 100 to 124% of her max HP. I don't see this changing much. I mean, you're more doing this for the utility of like the speed down and that kind of thing, as opposed to the damage. So, okay, she's going to do slightly more damage. I mean, again, this is a good move. This isn't going to really, it's now an even slightly better move, but doesn't really like do a whole lot, I wouldn't say. Okay, Phantom Hacker Claws. Skill 1. We got a lot of changes here. So hacking progress, each stack increases damage taken by 5%, reduces damage dealt by an additional 10%, and lowers speed by 4% up to a maximum of 3 stacks. Okay, so sure. Hack-in cannot be inflicted with... wait, let me go back and read this again really quick. Hold on. Hacking, each stack increases damage taken by 5%, reduces damage dealt by an additional 10%, and lowers speed by 4% up to a maximum of 3 stacks. Did we get rid of this? I'm not sure why this is crossed out, because the red kind of implies the buffs, but we have a strike through it. I don't know what this means. I used Kloss extensively, by the way. Strong unit, but kind of ended up being a little disappointing towards the end of my beta test here. Okay, let me look at the next one. So hack-in cannot be inflicted with hacking progress. Increases damage taken by 25%. Reduces damage dealt by an additional 40%. And then lowers speed by 20% and cannot be purified. Not sure what the strike through on this means. If you guys know exactly how this should be read, let me know, because yeah, I don't know. It kind of feels like they're removing this from the skill. I'm not sure. Sort of strange. And then the next skill says on her skill 3, this is a really, really good skill here. Deals 260% AoE damage to all enemies with a 100% chance to apply defense down, and also does speed down for 2 turns and 100% chance to apply 2 stacks of hacking progress to the primary target and 1 stack to the other targets. Strong move. I was briefly considering, well, okay, in the beta I actually used my guaranteed pull on Kloss because she's really useful for certain boss fights and she was a good PvP unit. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this will change her that much. I'm not sure exactly how to interpret her buffs here. Again, I don't know what they are actually meaning by this, but let me know in the comments below. Kloss is strong, and it would be kind of cool to see her get stronger. Because I don't know. I'm a fan of her character, and I had a lot of fun using her, even though I don't think she was like a really top tier unit. Okay, Freya. So our first guaranteed banner, probably the best waifu in the game, and was very useful, performed very well in the tournament, and I used her extensively in the beta as well. Skill 1 gets a debuff. So Dream Whisper passive. Each time an enemy is inflicted with a debuff, there's a 70% chance to push back its turn meter by 4%, triggered up to 3 times per turn for each enemy. So I believe this was guaranteed before. It wasn't like a huge pushback either, right? I mean, by 4%, and now they're not even making it guaranteed. It's kind of disappointing to see because she was very good, but honestly, I don't think it was at all overpowered. So I'm kind of a little bit sad here to see them debuff her. I mean, I don't think this is really going to change her. She's still going to do what she did. I mean, now it's a 70% chance as opposed to being guaranteed. But, if she was good before, she's still good. But again, I think it's a little bit of a shame to see that because I think she was not at all like overpowered and they could have just left her as is. Okay, Crimson Waltz Turn Dot. Skill 2 gets a debuff. Deals 4 instances of 70% damage to a single enemy, with each attack having a 30% chance to push back the target's turn meter by 30. Instead, now goes to 25%, and a 40% chance to dispel 1 buff from the target. I mean, this is pretty insignificant debuff here. I mean, yeah, I don't see this as changing much. Chiaki. Okay, Chiaki gets a lot of buffs here on skill 1, 2, and 3. So deals 240% damage to a single enemy, heals the 2 allies with the lowest HP percentage for 12%, now to 15% of max HP. Small adjustment, but hey, more heals over time can make a difference. And then heals a single ally instead of 40%, now 50% of their maximum HP, and applies 3 stacks of Origami Guardian lasting 5 turns for her skill 2. That's a pretty big buff. 10% is definitely significant. I mean, that's 25% more than it did previously. And then on skill 3, heals all allies instead of 24%, now 30% of their max HP, with an additional 1.3% heal effect every 2 HP lost by the target, and applies 2 stacks of Origami Guardian for at least 5 turns. So again, kind of another small percentage here like we saw on the first skill, but Chiaki was a decent healer previously, and this might bump her up to being like a pretty frequently chosen Chiaki, chosen healer. That said, the fact that we all get Linglo, makes it tough for any of these other ones. But in the early game, if you happen to pull Chiaki, I could see using her more than previously. Okay, Dina, getting some buffs here. Deals 240% of damage to a single enemy on her skill 1, with a 40% chance to steal turn meter by, instead of 25%, now 15%. I'm sorry, this is not a buff. This is a debuff. My bad. Yes, the green numbers got me, guys. The green numbers got me. So from 25 to 15%. Dina is a very strong unit, particularly against certain boss fights. And I forget the name of the one, but there's the third one where you farm shells, I believe. Aurora, I think it's called, as well as the guild raid boss. Dina can be very helpful. No, I'm sorry, not Aurora. She's good against Teramaton. There we go. And the guild raid boss. But she's useful against bosses in general, to be honest. But anyway, I'm sad to see the debuffs because I'm a huge fan of her. I love her design. She's a cool unit, and I was planning to build her even more in the live game than in the beta. So a little bit sad to see it, but I don't think that's going to like kill her or anything. And then on skill 2, passive, upon receiving the next crit damage, consume 1 stack of add true damage equal to 60% of the attacker's attack, and increases the attacker's turn meter instead of by 10% now to 6%. Dual Thorn Dina cannot trigger this effect. I don't think this is really going to change that much. I mean, I think Dina's still going to be quite a solid unit. Great PvE unit that free-to-play players can use, and will even be useful for whales, to be honest. I guess maybe they just decided she was going to be a little bit too useful. Okay, Kraken. This is a big one because Kraken is one of the best PvP units in the game, also very good for certain fights where you need crowd control, and is an SR, and just a generally cool guy, and he is getting a nerf. Kraken fans are in shambles right now. Deals 204% of AoE damage to all enemies with 75%, now only 65% chance to push back the target's turn meter. I mean, that is significant. That is significant, going from 75 to 65. It's probably not going to change that much because if you can gear him up a lot, you're probably going to be pretty much just as likely to hit on these effects anyway, but we'll see. Anyway, send back the turn meter, 35 or 30%. Now 60 and 50% chance to apply freeze for 1 turn. Again, less chance to do the freeze. I mean, but so this does make him worse. He was very, very good, though. He's very, very good. I wouldn't be surprised if this was less about nerfing Kraken and more about making the new unit, what is her name, Mio, even more enticing, and putting a little bit of a gap there between the SR and the SSR. They might have felt like some of their SRs were just a little too useful because some of these guys were amazing, honestly. I think Kraken will still see a lot of play, to be honest, though. Like I said, you put the right gear on him, and he's probably going to still be freezing people doing what you want him to do. You just need more effect accuracy. All right, Virtuous Maiden Sonya. She's probably the most useful SR in the game, to be honest. I mean, I know we talk about Kraken and Marvel a lot. We'll get to Marvel next. But Sonya, overall, just an all-star, amazing healer that in some cases could actually be more useful than Ling Lo. But she's getting nerfs. So, skill 2, her passive, at the end of a turn, if Sonya is in an incapacitated state, heals the 2 allies with the lowest HP percentage and purifies 1 debuff, healing equal instead of 16% down to 14% of her maximum HP. Additionally, for every 1% of HP Sonya loses, her healing effect increases now instead of 0.8% by 0.6%. I don't think this is a huge deal, honestly, but it does make her a little worse, which is kind of unfortunate because I thought giving everybody an easily attainable, like really good healer was really cool. Although they do set up so everybody can get Ling Lo, so maybe it's not as big of a problem anyway. But then they also say in skill 3, fixed an issue where Sonya could still trigger basic healing while under stun, freeze, petrify, or slumber. Okay, so this apparently was a bug, I guess they're claiming, as opposed to something that was intentionally part of her kit. They're calling it a bug anyway instead of a feature. This was a very strong ability, but I think this honestly isn't such a huge deal. I think just the fact that, I think other things about her were more significant than the fact that she could heal while frozen, right? I think that this is probably not a huge deal. Sonya will still be a useful unit, but I still am a little sad that she's getting debuffed. And then when we saw, Chiaki getting buffed earlier, that might push her above Sonya, although Sonya is still the only one that can revive. So we'll see. But I think she was just like an auto build, like, yes, everyone should use Sonya. Now, maybe not. We'll have to see how well she actually turns out. Okay, Marvel, probably the most infamous unit in the game. Could just do ridiculous stuff in PvP matches, and was an extremely useful, free to use SR for a lot of boss fights that could get long too. So just a generally ridiculous unit, and he is getting debuffs. And it looks like some pretty significant ones here. So deals 240% damage to a single enemy on his skill 1 with a 50%, now 40% chance to steal turn meter by, instead of 25%, 15%. That's pretty big. That's pretty big. So it's now less than 50% chance to steal the turn meter, and it's only by 15%. Now, that will probably still be worth using. That's still effective. But he's getting more debuffs. On skill 3, this is the one where you just push the entire enemy team all the way to the back. It was insane. Deals 280% AoE damage to all enemies with 100% chance to apply speed down and resistance down for 2 turns, and a 60% chance to push back the target's turn meter by, instead of 50%, 40%. Okay, so not pushing back the turn meter quite as much. 40% is still massive though. Again, I don't think this alone would make him bad, but he gets yet another debuff. Skill cooldown of skill 3 increased by 1 turn, so now goes up to 5 when was previously 4. And that was at maximum leveling, I believe. So it used to start at 5, and then if you got it leveled all the way up, then the skill would cool down in 4. So I have to assume it now starts at 6, and when it's maxed, it cools down at 5. This is pretty damning for a PvE kind of situation. Like 6 turns, if you don't have this leveled up, is like an absolute eternity. And, 5, even if you have it fully invested, going every 5th turn as opposed to every 4th turn is significant as you're cycling through that, being able to use this. So I could see him falling off a lot in PvE. I don't know if I hate this, to be honest. Again, I don't know. Maybe they're trying to make their new SSR shine a little bit more. But honestly, I think a lot of people complain about Marvel. But the ironic thing about that is, even though a lot of people complained about him and said like he might be too OP in PvP, I don't know if this actually affects his PvP game that much. Because, the thing is that a lot of PvP matches wouldn't come around for Marvel to do his skill 3 a second time anyway. It could happen. But really, it's that first initial setup where he pushes the entire enemy team back. They've got their speed down. You get to do everything. And like maybe you cleave them before they even get to take a move, or at least you take out their main DPS or something like that. And that's still going to happen, right? Like, it doesn't matter what the cooldown is. If it happens once, it happens once. That said, he has a lower chance to do all of this stuff. It might be able to be overcome with gear, but I feel like this is a bigger nerf to him than it was to Kraken. So Marvel will probably still be out there, but a pretty big debuff, I have to say. Okay, Victor. Skill 2 passive gets a debuff. For every 10% HP loss, increases damage dealt instead of 15%, 9%. Reduced damage taken by 6%. That's still the same. And then also fixed an issue where Puppet's Fury could stack multiple shields. Okay, so Victor was like an extremely high damaging unit in the beta and would be used in some of the fastest boss clears for PvE. You never really saw him in PvP, but would just do crazy fast boss runs in PvE. And this is a pretty big debuff, going from 15 to 9% for every 10% lost is pretty big. Because let's say you lost 50% of your HP. That is now 90% damage as opposed to 150%. So that's a lot. That's a lot. Maybe they decided it was too big of a DPS for free-to-play players to be able to have. I don't know. Honestly, I do feel like his damage was a bit too high. If Victor is up there doing as much damage as like Born or Messiah or even more, it's probably a problem. So I think this may have been the right way to go. Okay, Dorothy. Dorothy's skill 2 says fix an issue where this skill was not being cast during auto battle. Honestly, I didn't even know this was happening, but okay. Good that they fixed that bug. Because if we want her to be able to use her skill during auto battle, otherwise, like, that's kind of silly. Okay, number 41, probably the best R unit in the game. Unfortunately gets a debuff. Pushes forward allies on her skill 3. Turn meter, instead of 35%, only 20%, and applies attack up for 2 turns. That's a lot. That is a big nerf from 35 to 20%. Maybe they just thought she was too good for an R. Maybe. I think it was kind of cool that an R was actually that good, though. So I'm a little disappointed to see that. Okay, that was all the changes to unit skills. A lot of big changes here. I think there will be some shakeups in the tier list. We also got some shell-specific adjustments that I'll go through really quick here. So White Fang gets a debuff. So deals 2 instances of, instead of 140%, now 110% of damage. White Fang was a strong shell. This is a pretty big debuff. Probably still good, but maybe just better for balancing here. Artisan here, instead of applies shield equal to 440%, now 400% of its own defense. I don't have a whole lot of experience using this shell, but again, probably a good balance change. Codex of Magic. This one was really silly. So this was possibly the most busted shell in the game here. Now skills cannot have their cooldown reduced. You could kind of get into some weird situations where it would reduce your unit skill cooldown, and then you could reduce the skills cooldown, and then you just like always have your skill 3 up. It was kind of bananas. So this is a good adjustment. Okay, I was wondering what they would do with this. This was some of the feedback I gave them too. Amber, skills cannot have their cooldown reduced. Same kind of thing here. Yeah, good. Codex and Amber, they need this. Skills can't have their CD reduced. That's good. Okay, Halloween. I don't remember what the shell is. Fix an issue with incorrect actual trigger probability. Okay, cool. Twilight Knight, this is a good shell. I used this shell. Before, the main body axe deals 200%, now got a nerf to 160% damage to the enemy with the lowest HP percentage. Maybe they felt like this guy was getting in too many kills, because that hit really hard, to be honest. I don't know if this was good. I'm going to trust them. I'm going to say this is probably good, but that is a pretty big debuff. And then Diamond Heart. Let's see. Applies shields equal to, instead of 360, now 300% of its own defense. Okay, so basically they nerfed, like, none of these shells got a buff, which shells are so good, it's probably good that they debuffed a lot of these, particularly the ones with the Codex of Magic and Amber there. And then they get in some other optimizations. Like I said, there's a lot of other things they talked about here, things that we've already seen and I've talked about in other videos, but they're just kind of like including here in the patch notes. Cool to get some more shots here of our new unit though, Mizuki Makoto. Anyway, that is it, guys. Let me know what you think about these changes. Again, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't forget or you don't miss my tier list for launch. We've got some big changes here. Again, old information is kind of inaccurate now, so I will be making a tier list on that, as well as talking about some specific units on whether they're still worth using or not. I will also be making a full gear tutorial as well, and of course lots of other Etheria Restart news. So I will catch you guys in the next video or stream. You can also join my Discord in the description below as well.